And I suddenly realized I shouldn't have done it because it sounded very pompous. But nevertheless, I said, no, I can't do things I don't believe in.
Welcome to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. This podcast is brought to you by the Bangalore International Centre. My name is Arshia and I'm here with Anmol. We recorded these conversations with Girish right before his death in June 2019. In these episodes, we have a chance to listen to Girish's wide-ranging observations about his life and his work. Along with excerpts from his plays, we'll hear various people talk about his legacy as an artist and as a public intellectual.
No, we were not brought up in this at all. Ours is much more of a humanist view, which is to say you bring up your children, you bring yourself to decide what is right and what is wrong. And this applies not because you're a Hindu, not because you're a Muslim or whatever, but you apply it to the whole society. This is how I would like a human being to be treated.
That's as good a definition of humanism as I've ever heard, actually. But when Girish talks about humanism, it isn't an exercise in abstraction. It was a credo for him. It informed his writing, his political activism, it informed the stands he took in his public life.
In fact, I can't think of anyone in the last few decades who occupied Indian public life in all these ways. He popped up all over the place, on the big screen, on Doordarshan as the host of Turning Point in 1990s, as the chairman of the Sangeet Natak Academy, and the director of the Nehru Centre in London, of course, at so many literary festivals. But most importantly, he was there at local and national protests and demonstrations as a citizen standing with other citizens.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't matter if you were a woman or Muslim or what your caste background was, because for Girish, you were first and foremost a human being. Even in his home, at parties, or if you were with him, whether it was a superstar like Shankar Nag or it was somebody like myself, Girish treated us with the same affection and, of course, also with the same disdain, yeah? And I feel that he obviously took women very seriously because all his women characters are strong. Even in Yayati, his first play.
This was another turning point. It completely astounded me because I didn't think I was a playwright. I didn't think I wrote in Kannada, wanted to write Kannada. And I was not interested in mythology. It was part of my growing up, but, it was Yayati, the play. And I wrote the play, and it had 4 female characters, and no one touched it with a Bajpur.
Girish might have stumbled into the Yayati myth and surprised himself, with the women characters that he wrote. But women with agency, aware of their sexual desire, these were to become the hallmarks of his writing. It's what we remember him for.
Take Padmini in Hayavadana, Rani in Nagamandala, Vishakha in The Fire and the Rain. So many of his plays have these strong women characters. Girish told us about writing the courtesan in his play Flowers.
Well, it's actually not my story. It's a folk tale which is the fort here, Chitradurga fort. And the story occurs in a Kannada novel by Tarasu, you see. And the main thing is the flowers and the prostitute and so on don't matter. They just argue with each other. What is more important? Music or political power, and so completely, when I first read it, I said, what a beautiful story, how completely ruined. It seems to have missed the whole point, the erotic point of flowers being there at all. But then that was typical of or the Kannada writers. I mean, the courtesan in the story occurs in 5 lines, I think. That's it.
I love this. He takes the minor character of the courtesan and puts her at the center of the priest crisis. Amazing. But it's not just in flowers. Look what he does with the American daughter-in-law in Bhairappa's novel, Tabbaliyu Nina the Magane, I believe it's called. Girish made it into a film called Godhuli with Karnad, and the daughter-in-law becomes a really sympathetic character at the end.
No, you see, when Samskara succeeded, the most obvious choice was Vangshavamsha. Because that was a Bhairappa novel, equally popular. And it came via Karnad. And I said to Karnad, I don't like his stuff. And Karnad said, you write the script. So we did it. Then we did Tabbaliyu Nina. Again, the entire ending is changed by me. It's not Bhairappa's ending. I mean, not the cows and all that is there. For instance, it's completely antipathetic and to the English woman. Exactly. She's completely unsympathetic. She's made fun of. She's shown as a snob. She doesn't. Before she enters the hut, she puts her thumb just to see if the cow dung will stick to her. This kind of character. And I said to Bhairappa after the film, he said, Illa, you changed it. I said, no, look, this woman has left her home, society, everything to come here. And you are not willing to give her this much sympathy. So I changed the whole character. Bhairappa then accepted.
And it isn't that Girish simply has female characters. They sound real. They talk back to the men. Listen to this pivotal monologue from the first act of The Fire and the Rain, which was published in English in 1998. Here, Vishakha speaks with Yavakri, her old lover, who had spurned her in his quest for spiritual power. Maitri Surendra reads the part of Vishakha.
Yes, father was happy. I was married off to Paravasu. I didn't want to, but that didn't matter. The night of the wedding, my husband said to me, I know you didn't want to marry me, but don't worry, I'll make you happy for a year. And he did, exactly for 1 year. He plunged me into a kind of bliss I didn't know existed. It was heaven, here and now, at the tip of all my senses. Then, on the first day of the second year of our marriage, he said, enough of that, we now start on our search. And then, it wasn't that I was not happy, but the question of happiness receded into the background. He used my body and his own body like an experimenter, an explorer, as instruments in search. Search for what? I never knew. But I knew he knew. Nothing was too shameful, too degrading, even too painful. Shame died in me, and I yielded. I let my body be turned inside out as he did his own. I had a sense he was leading me to something mystical, spiritual. We never talked. Only the sense pervaded the air. You are still lost in the fragrance of the jackfruit, Yavakri. I have known what it is to grow heavy, burst open, drip and rot, to fill the world with one's innards. Then one day he received the invitation from the king to be the chief priest of the fire sacrifice. And he left. The site of the fire sacrifice is only a couple of hours away from here, but in all these 7 years, he hasn't come back. I know he can't, but I look forward to having him home once the 7 years are over. Alone, I have become like dry tinder, ready to burst into flames at a breath, to burn things around me down at the slightest chance.
So apart from women, other people who are marginalized and caricatured, they also become real in Girish's works. He makes us relate to a horse-headed man in Hayavadna, and we feel the agony of a snake killing himself for love in Nagamandala.
But even more explicitly, Vimala in Boiled Beans on Toast, she's a maid and she talks back to middle-class complacency. And then there's Nitilai, the tribal girl in The Fire and the Rain, and she totally challenges Paravasu's Brahminical superiority. And when Girish writes Tughlaq, which is right after Yayati, he creates a Muslim sultan of flesh and blood, a human being who has inner torment and aspirations.
Yeah, the kind of work he did to make his female characters authentic, he put in the same work to make his Muslim characters real. For his Tughlaq to be real and not to be some historical relic, Girish had to learn about Islam. And as he often liked to say, from then on, he got obsessed with this part of our history and culture.
Mad Sultan. What made it even madder was that he had actually banned public prayer in his kingdom for 5 years. And I thought, how marvelous. And I wrote about him. But then as I started reading deeper and deeper, it occurred to me that if you were an atheist, as I wanted him to be, you wouldn't ban public prayer. It would mean nothing to you. It's only a man who was a theist, who loved God, who would worry so much about prayer, to whom prayer would matter. He somewhere wanted to challenge God. Do what you like, I won't pray for you. And why? So in fact, that whole complex attitude. So then I went into Islam. Started reading Islam. And I didn't even know the difference between Shia and Sunni. I went to a scholar who told me the difference, and all that. I remember then I did a fairly thorough this. Then UP had published a book called Call of the Minaret. That gave me the call. But that was serendipity. Here was a play. India had been divided into India and Pakistan, and it had been translated into Urdu by Karnad. It was done by Al-Qazi, who was looking for. Things like that. The associations of. So there it was. So Islam was built into it, as it were.
It's startling, this admission that he didn't know the difference between Shia and Sunni till he started researching Tughlaq.
Yeah, well, not to let him off the hook, but many people still don't know that difference. But what do you think he meant when he says that Islam was built into the play?
I think Girish's insight was that Tughlaq wasn't just a mad sultan, but he was in fact dealing with the demands of being a monarch, a Muslim monarch. Even though Girish had wanted him to be an atheist, Girish realized that for Tughlaq, his God, his Muslimness were far too important to be just cast aside.
But I think Islam isn't just built into the play because Girish created a convincing Muslim character. I think Girish is also referring to the performance history of Tughlaq. It was written while partition was still fresh in people's minds. Karan translated it into Urdu by candlelight. During the Pakistan War in 1965, Ibrahim Al-Qazi and Alik Padamsi's productions catapulted this play onto the national stage. It's as if all these talented theatre people were attracted to this play, to Girish's Tughlaq, because it allowed them to think more deeply about a Muslim ruler who was mainly misunderstood.
Yeah, perhaps it is important for Girish himself to understand this part of our history. Like many people of his generation, Girish had grown up around Muslims. But at least to begin with, Girish wasn't free of some prejudices towards them.
Yeah, but unlike other people in his generation, he grew up to be a man who examined his prejudices.
I grew up in a place called Sirsi, which had a population of 8,000. It was like a medieval town. There was a section for Catholics, a section for Konkani speakers, a section for Havyak Brahmins, each one. And but one school in which everyone came, you know. And the Muslims, these were my friends. I even learned Urdu, then write and read and so on. Riots took place. Pakistan riots took place. I'd just been through RSS and I drew pictures of Hindus killing Muslims, and Muslims killing, these were pages and pages. And once my mother came and looked at it, she picked up it and she said, "And you think they'll just sit quietly, do you?" And put it and went away. That's it. That was the total response to I remember. And that's it. That's quite right.
I have to say, I find it hard to picture Girish as someone who went to a RSS Shakha as a young boy. I mean, this is a man who went all the way to Ayodhya to protest the Babri Masjid demolition, who would call for communal harmony around the Baba Budangiri shrine dispute, and who was front and center in the public mourning after Gauri Lankesh's murder.
I think it's clear that for Girish, his commitment to secularism was unshakable. It defined him as a public intellectual. Girish took the childhood memory of his own Islamophobia and turned it into a short story which is centered around the fear of Muslims in a Hindu chawl.
This is a story I wrote for Deshkara. The story was based actually on what happened in the 1947 in Bombay. I brought it up a bit. This is an RSS man, young man, based on a Navy of man, and who feels that he has not been recognized in anything. And suddenly his Shakha Pramukh tells him that today in your chawl, the Muslims are coming. So be careful. And so he was given this responsibility. And he takes together other people who are in the RSS, young people, puts them in different parts so that they can guard the chawl. You see, the chawl is very important to this. The structure of the chawl, because it's round and like this one. And he's asked to guide, and all night they're supposed to sit and so on. And he goes around telling everyone, they are coming, be careful, be careful. And in the process, I introduced the different people who are in the chawl, the mixed crowd that lives in the chawl, Konkanis and the other thing, including the Madhwa Brahmin, whose son has gone to America and married an American woman. So he has brought his cousin from a mutt. And Madhwa mutts have shaven widows. So he has brought his shaven widow to cook for him and look after him and so on. Then the short story says, whenever Konkani girls came nearby, she put a pallu to her nose because she smelled special. So the shaven widow is there, and all that happens. And the whole thing is set, and he tells everyone to be careful when they go to sleep. So at midnight, he's sitting there on the staircase, and suddenly he's woken up. He gets up, he picks up his lathi, he reaches out, and suddenly there is this bald head of a Muslim sitting next to him, covered, about to jump on him, holding on to his lathi. And this man had come from Mundugod, in all these rural Karnataka, Muslims shave their head. So he reaches out, the shaven head, he touches, and he knew the Muslims have come without his name. So he screams. He said, Musliman Allah, Musliman Banno, Musliman Banda. And the whole chawl wakes up. And they run around and so on. There's a 20-25 minutes of uproar. When that subsides, and everyone has gone back, a very thin voice is heard hurling abuses, the choicest of Madhwa abuses in a female, this thing. These bastards won't even let one go to the paikhana. You know, and how is one to do? What is one to do? And everyone laughs and everyone retires, and he's humiliated. He goes back almost crying. What to do? And as he goes to sleep, he thinks, no, the Muslims are very clever. They couldn't have let it go there. They switched this woman and put the woman there where there was a Muslim. I felt the Muslim. I felt his head. Could it have gone? You know? So, and so he is convinced that. Then the story ends on 7th of December when Babri Masjid was knocked down. This man opens the papers, and there are the photographs of the Babri Masjid with all the domes. You know, the domes are like that widow's shaven head. And he looks at it and he said, well, history has passed me by. I could have saved it. But, no one took it. The whole world has changed and no one cares, whatever. And he just sits there thinking how history has cheated him of his dues. Because he had actually saved a chawl full of, and no one gets news and credit.
You remember? It was Vivek Shanbag who told us that Girish had written 2 short stories.
Too bad that none of them have been translated into English.
But we have them both here, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were.
This character of the old man in the short story who's been left behind by history, he's fascinating. He opens the newspaper on the morning after the Babri Masjid is demolished and sees in the domes of the fallen mosque his own humiliation.
Yeah.
A humiliation from many decades earlier, when as a young man he had mistaken the head of a shaven widow for that of a Muslim man.
And the chawl is a character in the story. Girish mentions the structure of the chawl. What he's alerting us to is that chawls have many private rooms, but they have a single common toilet, a paikhana. And if it wasn't for that very particular kind of architecture, this encounter between the widow and the man would not even have been possible, especially not at night.
But Girish is also using the chawl as a narrative device, a device to bring together all these different kinds of people from different regions and from different caste backgrounds who must live cheek by jowl in the city. Take, for instance, the Madhava widow, who sneers at her Konkani neighbor, who she thinks smells of fish.
Yeah, this fish smell, it may feel like a tiny detail, but it reminds us how attuned Girish was to what he saw and heard and even what he smelled.
Girish is also attentive to things in more unfamiliar settings. The conversations about his years at Oxford reveal how he used that opportunity to become more aware of himself and of others in that faraway foreign land.
Well, I was ambitious. My accent, I told you my accent story.
No.
I went to Oxford. And my ambition was to become the president of the Oxford Union, because my first principal in Dharwad, V.K. Gokak, that awful poet, but he had got a first at Oxford, and he had mentioned it, and I dreamt of becoming the president. And I pursued that, and I became the president of Oxford. And when I went to Oxford, I joined the Oxford Union, and I said, oh God, I've got an Indian accent. And I started improving my accent, changing them and getting this ha-ha, perfectly all right, that's kind of stuff. And then I went into the union. And then as I mixed with people, I suddenly realized that if I succeed, I will have nothing distinct for me. I'll be like every other English schoolboy. So I went back and started shedding my English accent and arriving at an accent carefully honed, which was not offensive, but which would sound educated, but what was Indian, it was not English.
What a sweet story. Who'd have thought that the mighty Girish Karnad could have these insecurities? So we asked him if he had any experience of discrimination while he was a student in the UK.
If you looked for guest room or something for the night, or if Kitty came, you came across it. For instance, because I was the Oxford Union president, I would be invited to parties. by nurses. And so I would go, and the nurses didn't expect an Indian. Because the accent didn't show me as an Indian. I went there and immediately it was clear. That kind. That was common. I mean, then the nurses wouldn't dance with me. Wouldn't dance, But there was no, I won't dance with you. That kind of not explicit rejection. Not to me, anyway. When I was there was something called Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. This is against the atom bomb, led by Bertrand Russell. And they had a massive, in my third year, massive meeting at Trafalgar Square. Okay, and I was invited to sit there on the podium next to Bertrand Russell and, attack. I said, no, I'm not coming. This is your defense and your right. I can't tell Britain don't have, whether rightly or wrongly, I can't tell you don't have defense mechanism because I'm not an Englishman. That's for you to decide. So I didn't join the CND and I didn't march.
It seems that Girish realizes something here, that it isn't about this one-off moment of glory, but it's about the bigger picture for himself of who he wanted to be and where he wanted to act and where it was appropriate for him to be a political actor.
They're straight from Oxford. Actually, that's a record of and when they say that racist is overdone, it's not. That's how the racists behaved. And I got my sad part. This is that I never met him. Had I met him, I would have got a more human angle to it, probably. People carrying bicycle chains and hitting Asians. That is all that was happening.
So unsurprisingly, for a young writer, Girish took these experiences and he put them in his plays. For example, in Anju Malige, which still hasn't been published in English, Girish deals with racism in English society in the 1960s, how Indians who were living there responded to that reality. And even the Trafalgar Square moment, where Girish understood something about himself, that also makes its way into the play.
But it's not just a record of the time. Girish has this capacity to take a singular experience and transform it into something universal. And, that's what makes it art. I look at the way he talks about the character of the racist boyfriend in Anju Malige. It would be so easy to caricature someone that you fear and loathe. But Girish, in fact, regrets not getting a closer look at a person like this so that he could humanize even this bad guy and give him a worthwhile narrative arc in the play.
You're so right. All this might come across as a digression, but Girish's life and his politics, they informed what he wrote and how he wrote about it. The years he spent honing his craft as a playwright, those were also the years where he became more clear-eyed and vocal about his politics. 40 years after his time at Oxford, when he was back in the UK as the director of the Nehru Centre, Girish took his job as India's cultural ambassador seriously. It's in that spirit that he first took on Naipaul.
Naipaul, I hated from the word. I met him once and couldn't stand him. You see, I was in London at the Nehru Centre, and he appeared on a BBC program talking to Nisha Pillai, in which he lambasted the Muslim. They have destroyed Indian culture, he said. They have contributed nothing, and so on and so on. I was horrified, so I wrote to the BBC and they said, no, look, I'd like to reply to it. They said, sorry, you're a member of the government of India. You have to come through High Commission. And there was no way I could attack, So I waited till I got the right. That has been my great strength. I can wait years. And then read him, and then I realized that dear Naipaul doesn't understand Indian music. And I said, the Lord God hath delivered him in my hands. Because if you don't understand music, it's like writing about Germany without knowing 18th century Germany without knowing Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, anyone, and writing about Germany. So I attacked him on that ground. And this is where I was on very safe grounds, because because they couldn't say to me, those who criticized me, that I was just being vindictive. I had a perfectly good point. He has nothing to say about Indian music. How can you write about India? He writes about everything. So, or at least I think so. So I called him tone deaf. Now, I also have been in publishing long enough to know that you have to give catchphrases. And I called Naipaul tone deaf. That caught on. Naipaul is tone deaf.
Girish was obviously horrified by Naipaul and how blinkered he was about India.
He was just aghast that Naipaul would use his public stature to disparage the entire Indian Muslim community. A decade later, at the 2012 Tata Lit Live Festival, Girish really went after Naipaul.
Yeah, he called Naipaul tone deaf, a person who knew little about Indian culture. For as far as Girish was concerned, Naipaul had completely missed the syncretism that Girish believed lay at the heart of India's best traditions. So, Girish used that public forum and all the weight of his own considerable stature to hold up a mirror to all of us. Naipaul could believe whatever he wanted to, but why were we pandering to him?
Absolutely. Why were other Indians honoring a man who had such dangerous prejudices towards an Indian religious minority? This Naipaul affair and the later Tagore and Tipu controversies, they got a lot of press, and many people condemned Girish as an old man just looking for some attention. But actually, Girish had been speaking out on social and political issues since the late 1980s.
I remember in the early 1990s during Rath Yatra, Girish had simply asked whether India needed another temple, and stones were thrown at his house. But Girish, being who he was, he told this story off, and for him it was a badge of honor. And so we spoke to him about what moved him to become more politically active.
That really happened much later. In fact, it happened in the early, when the Hubli Dargah issue started. And my friends started getting attacked. And they had no defense. You see, my attack on Naipaul was, you speak on BBC and you attack the Muslims. The Muslims have no defense. No one speaks for them. You know? So I took that up with the Dargah. This is in 92, I think. Because my mother was a widow who had remarried and was forever saving widows. That was in the air, I think.
Girish felt that it was equally important for him to go to both Hubli and Ayodhya to act on the national and the local level. He saw that it wasn't just about a piece of land or the demolition of an unused mosque. It makes me think that perhaps he understood that all these events would come together to shape India's future.
Well, he clearly saw that there was something going on, a rupture in the early 1990s, because in both his short stories, he returns to the destruction of the Babri Masjid and talks about how it impacted ordinary individuals. And I've always wondered, why he never translated these stories into English, where they would have had a much, much wider audience. They're very good stories. They're powerful.
There's a story called Alida Mele in Kannada. Alida Mele means after annihilation. And the story is by Shivram Karan, and it's about a man who leaves his money to two distant widows, cousins, whom he has not seen for a very long time. And this man now goes in search of those widows and finds that they are actually on two sides of the same village, but they will not talk to each other because of family feuds, And they come together because of him. And when he asked them what they want, they said, we wanted this one temple to build. Do you mind building it? And he builds it. I had a film producer, and his brother translated it into Urdu. And this man was a film producer, and he went absolutely bonkers about this story. He wanted to make a film of it. It starts off by Rizvi telling me he's got rights from Shivram Karan. He's got a letter, and he's going to do it. And I said to him, you can't do it. I teased him. We had a big argument about it. I said, do you know that to do it authentically, these widows will have to be shaven? Are you willing to shave your widows? So he said, what? What do you mean, Hema Malini and others will shave? They won't shave. So I said, then how will you do it? Then he said, what about Girish Kasavudis? And so on, we argue about it. And then I say, I'll do it. And then I go to Singapore for some shooting. When I come back from Singapore, Anantnag tells me that this man is dead. Rizvi is dead. That's it. That's stuck. That's where the story should have ended. Except the Rizvi's son turns up at my house. He says, my family needs money. And, this money is there. And would you help us get it? I said, yes. So, and I go through the accounts and I find that this money comes from a real RSS organization. In those days, there were lots of fly-by-night producers who'd bring money and make films. And this RSS man is making a film, getting this Rizvi, because he's in the industry, to do it. So I discovered that it's being funded by an RSS man. I go with him and I said to him, look, you could cheat him. You can't cheat me. I'm in film industry. You're paying him only half the amount. I said, no, not possible. You sit with me. I sit with him, account him, get him the full money. All that is agreed. And when all that is agreed, Babri Masjid happened. And when the son comes, shall we proceed from here? I said, look, I was keen on it because I believed in building of the temple. But now the building of the temple has changed its meaning. If it gets around that Girish Karnad is building a temple, this would be taken that he's supporting the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Everyone will think that this is a film, this is a propaganda for building Ram Janmabhoomi. So I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. So he said, but that my family is dependent, that Muslim family, on my getting this money. And the money will come only if you agree to do that. My mother has sent some meeta tukda, etc. Can you do something for us? And I turned to the window. The last sentence of the short story says, I walked to the window and I suddenly realized I shouldn't have done it because it sounded very pompous. But nevertheless, I said, no, I can't do things I don't believe in. That's it. Then I'll leave this here. And he turns to go. He had left the script, and so I said to him, no, take it, I don't need it. And he says, no, the script I have no use for, but I was leaving behind the mithai my mother had sent for you.
I was completely confused when he was narrating the story because he kept saying, I said this and I said that, till the penny dropped and I realized that he was talking about himself as a character in the story.
What a great structure. Okay, so let me explain it to you again. Girish the writer places Girish Karnad, the public figure, in a dilemma that Girish the writer faces in his own life. In this story, the personal and the political collide. What the character Girish Karnad wants to do undermines the ideals he believes in. He wants to make this film in which a temple gets built. He wants to help his Muslim producer get his money. But with the demolition of Babri Masjid, the building of a temple and the making of this film, both had changed their meaning. For Girish Karnad in the story and for Girish in his real life, it was just not possible to do business as usual.
One of the things that Girish is best known for in his plays is the framed narrative, the story within the story. And here again, Girish puts his public life in a frame so that he can examine what it means for him to take all these political positions.
I'm telling you, Girish is one of the finest minds of our time. He can think and write like this about himself without fear. And so we asked Girish how he understood the current situation in India. In your lifetime?
Not so. Not what came in the last 4 years. Before that, yes, it was there. But this sort of deliberate manipulation, that Modi and Shah have been able to do. I didn't think Indians would be so gullible. But there is an innate anti-Muslim feeling in India. There's no question at all about it. If you go into the villages and so on, for instance, if a Muslim a couple of Muslims the women take the children to their side. That is there in the villages and so on. But it's a kind of prejudice. I mean, not a. Now they have turned it into a. Because basically at the back of that was also the feeling that every man can live as he likes, every caste can live as he likes. Muslims can live as they like. India is a caste society, and each caste has its own right. That is our basic assumption. The Muslims have been one section by themselves. That has been there always. I mean, but then it's true also between castes. For instance, my brother married a Gaud Sarswat woman, and there was an uproar. Now we are Sarswats. They're a subcaste. But these people are now saying, in fact, no, you can't live like Muslims. You have to live like.
He never finished that sentence. As the last line from Hamlet goes, the rest is silence.
I want to pick up on something else here. Girish is so clear about caste and its hold on Indian society. I wish he'd addressed it more in his plays. I mean, I really think there's something to the critique that the Mahut in Bali doesn't occupy the story in any meaningful way, like Girish's female characters do or his Muslim characters do.
But he does write about caste in Taladanda, how caste politics fractures a society. We tend to see Taladanda as a play about the church and the state, but really it's about the intransigence of caste, how Brahmins such as Damodara, they don't let go of their caste power, and for most of the others, their imagination is just too crippled even when they want to bring in change.
Yeah, so both in his public life and in the best of his plays, Girish really took on the big questions, be it for us as individuals or for us as a society. And he made us confront them.
The river has no fear of memories, and Girish, he has no fear of history. Girish goes to the three critical moments in Kannada history, in Taledanda, in Crossing to Talikota, and in Dreams of Tipu Sultan. In all of these, Girish again and again demands that we think afresh with him about our stories and about our histories. Girish told us why he chose to write about Tipu.
Tipu because he was a local. But I was drawn to Tipu by Ramanujan.
Again, yeah.
Again, everything I did goes through a few people. It was Ramanujan was obsessed with Tipu. He has a short story on Tipu, on a English soldier who's following Tipu's path. He has a short story. And Ramanujan told me about this notebook that Tipu had, in which he had kept a record of his dreams. There are 36 dreams written down by Tipu, which he wrote during the war battles, and which he then hid under his pillow. And the notebook was not found till after the war, when the British ransacked the palace. And I thought it was marvelous, the whole notion of a warrior on a horseback writing down his dreams and.
The BBC commissioned Girish to write a radio play in 1997 for the 50th anniversary of Indian independence.
So Girish responded with this striking image of a warrior on horseback with his notebook of dreams.
And wrote The Dreams of Tipu Sultan. So Girish had the audacity to use this opportunity to remind the English of their own colonial past in India, and at the same time to make us think about Tipu, an anti-colonial hero who's so frequently maligned. So let's listen to this excerpt from The Dreams of Tipu Sultan, where the English historian Mackenzie is talking to Tipu's court historian, Kirmani. The Dreams of Tipu Sultan was published in English in 2004 and is read here by Kafil Jafri and Vivek Madan.
I think you're far too obsessed with his death.
Not his death, the way he was destroyed.
Surely you're being melodramatic now. Every bit of evidence we've gathered proves he asked for it.
Yes, for you he's made up of bits of evidences, bits of arguments that prove that your side was right. And that's what I don't understand. You have your version of history all worked out. Why do you want my side? Why do you care?
I am interested in the other side. You could say that's how we Europeans are brought up, to be interested in the other side as well. That, I suppose, is our strength.
I find a lifetime insufficient to understand my own. Besides, I spent my life serving him and his father. And now I work for you, his enemies. What does that make me? A traitor? Am I trustworthy anymore? Doesn't that worry you? It worries me.
Our loyalty is to history, Kirmani ji. Keep emotion out. Stick to the facts.
You mean memories. But that's where the real betrayal lies. Do you know I was just trying to remember what he looked like on that last day and I just couldn't.
That's another thing you have avoided writing about. His last day.
I remember it vividly. But the crucial detail still eludes me. He was staying in the caravanserai on the northern ramparts. He'd been there for a couple of days with the soldiers, watching the English news tighten. It was sweltering hot. We had been praying for a downpour, for then the moats would have been flooded and the English attack delayed. But the clouds had hung ominously, inert, neutral. We were halfway through our lunch, our sweat streaming into our plates, when the skies exploded. The English had launched their assault. The Sultan washed his hands and got up. He buckled on his sword belt, took out an envelope from his pocket, sealed it, and gave it to me. "Keep it till I come back," he said. At that moment, news came that Sayyid Ghaffar had been killed by a cannonball. He mumbled a prayer and left. I remember thinking, I'll never forget that expression on his face. But I have. For the life of me, I can't remember his face at that moment. It's such betrayal.
And then?
I forgot all about the letter. Naturally, with all that followed. Next day, I found it in my pocket. Reluctantly, I broke open the seal. Inside was a paper on which he had recorded the dream he had had the previous night. His last dream. With that, my history ends. Yours begins.
Here again, Girish presents Tipu's life within a frame. A conversation about how history is written. Mackenzie makes the case for a Western historiography, while Kirmani, he pleads for itihasa, our way of narrating history that honors the personal story as well as the larger circumstance.
Yeah, history for Kirmani is not just about battles won and battles lost. It's also about human beings, their memories, their dreams. But why, Anmol, have we spent so much time talking about Girish's plays in this episode, which is about him as a public intellectual and a political activist?
Because these things are inseparable. You miss something when you just look at his public life without seeing how he's examining these same questions in his writing.
Yeah, it's a rare creative person who also uses his own life to respond as fully as possible to what he cares about. Till the very end, Girish stood for what he believed in. He used his considerable public stature to draw our attention to the right and the good.
More and more, over the years, Girish had become our conscience keeper.
I miss that. And I miss him. You have been listening to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. We thank the Nilekhani Philanthropies for supporting this series. Pallavi MD and Konarak Reddy for the original music, Gokul Abhishek, Gaurav Krishna, and the Bangalore studio for sound recording and engineering. At the Bangalore International Centre, our thanks to Lekha Naidu, Raghu Tenkaila, Saraswati MP, S. Sarvanna Raj, Rajashekhar BN, Manas Sampath, and of course, V. Ravichandran. Ajay Krishnan, Sunil Shanbag, Vinod Ravindran, and Vivek Madan, thank you for being there when we needed you. Thank you also, Vivek Shanbag and Shanta Gokhale. Our special thanks to the Karnad family. Anmol Tikku and myself, Arshia Sattar, have put these episodes together from conversations that we had with Girish Karnad in June 2019.